I don't know how many, obviously you were attracted to the topic today or you wouldn't be here. It's a bit of a geeky topic, I think, for normal people. Many people do not think about enunciation at all. Some people probably don't even really know what it is. And they certainly wouldn't think of it as a leadership superpower. So I had this brainstorm because those of you who know me know that I have a hypersensitive ear for all kinds of things related to communication. Filler words is one of them. And enunciation is another. I really notice when people are not clearly pronouncing their words. And I guess for me, I became aware of my own enunciation and had to really work on it because I spent so many years teaching in classrooms with people whose first language wasn't English. And in that case, you have to speak super clearly or they can't understand you. It just stuck for me. I used to be part of a church over in Rochester, for those of you who know the local area. And when I would read the lesson, people would come up to me afterwards in the coffee hour and say, "Oh, we love it when you read because we can understand every word." I'm like, I know, that's just something I do. So that is how I came to believing that enunciation is important. It's all about, it contributes to that clarity of voice, which shapes our presence. And as some of you know, this whole topic of executive presence is super top of mind right now, I guess I would say, particularly for women. So we're all women here so far. We did have a couple guys sign up for this today, but if they're not joining us, this is something that as women, I believe we need to pay more attention to. Although I will say men need to pay attention to it as well. I had a CEO client not that long ago who really struggled with mumbling. His default communication way of communicating was not to open his mouth very wide. Natalia, you'll have to forgive me, but I do use French speakers as examples because in French, you simply don't have to open your mouth very wide to speak the language. So obviously I became aware of enunciation and what sounds in language people struggle with because of my background in intercultural communication and international work. There are certain language groups who do find certain sounds in English difficult to pronounce. And then we as English speakers can find sounds in other languages difficult to pronounce as well. And it almost always comes down to architecture of your mouth and the muscles in your face. I remember learning Italian. I had to learn to bring my tongue forward in my mouth in order to roll an R. And I have to do that because of my name, Barbara. But then when I learned French, I had to learn to swallow the R, which is a totally different architecture in your face and your throat and your mouth. So some of what I bring to the topic does have to do with my intercultural international background. However, for all of us speaking English, enunciating and speaking clearly is super important. So this whole idea of you had me at hello, or did you? Did the way that you spoke to me catch my attention and command my attention? So I'm going to ask each of you to just think about this. Think of a leader you have witnessed recently who you felt really commanded the room. And then think about how they spoke. What did they sound like? Did they enunciate their words? Did they speak clearly? Were they paying attention to the way they were speaking the language, if you like? Can you all think of an example of somebody you've heard recently? There's Joel. Welcome, Joel, and welcome, Rachel. This is just to say, we all know that anything we want to change in the way that we speak or the way that we act in general starts with awareness. It starts with us being aware that we have an issue or we don't do something particularly well. We want to do it better. And once we realize that we want to do that better, we can work on it. So one of the big messages I want you to take away today is the fact that enunciation is a learned skill. It is not something you're born with. Of course, there are people who do have speech impediments, and that's a whole different thing. They have to work at how they pronounce words because they have some type of physical, I don't know what we should call it, malady. It's not probably the right word, but they have something physically that they struggle with. However, all of us have, if we do not have a speech impediment, we all have the ability to use our mouth and our facial muscles to express ourselves clearly. So all of us can learn how to do this. This is some data that is old and out there in a lot of different ways. And it's often misinterpreted, actually. Albert Moravian was the guy who did the research on how messages pertaining to feelings and attitudes are interpreted by other people. His research is particular to feelings and attitudes. If you think about it, we're frequently speaking about things that are related to feelings and attitudes, but it doesn't apply to every single type of communication. But what's important to pull out here is that a lot of our message is interpreted by others by the way that we say the words. Our pronunciation, our clarity, our intonation pattern, all of those things highly influence how people interpret our message. What can happen is if the message and the way we're saying it are not in line with each other, we create cognitive dissonance for that audience or that listener. They're hearing one thing and like interpreting or hearing the words and then hearing the way you're saying them and going, that doesn't match up. Actually, my best example of this is the way that we talk to dogs. If we say, oh, good dog, and the dog feels like it's being rewarded. But we can also say, oh, bad dog. And the dog thinks we're praising them because of the tone of our voice, when actually our words are saying something different. And we can also think of examples in speaking with humans where we have a dissonance between what we're saying and the way that we're saying it. So that's just to say that this is important. This is something that the human brain picks up on. Our roadmap for today, this may be a bit ambitious, but I'm going to, and in fact, the last point I left off, so we're only going to do the first four. We're going to make the leadership case for enunciation. Why is this a leadership issue? Cover a few pitfalls that can undermine us. We'll talk about the mechanics of clear speech, which I think is the most interesting part of the presentation today. And then I do have a couple of exercises at the end that are just a bit of fun, really. However, they are exercises that you can put into practice. So the leadership case for enunciation. And first of all, what is it? The definition is that it's the deliberate shaping and articulation of sounds, syllables, and words so that your speech is precise, intelligible, and intentional. And I think that really ties into the leadership case right there. This idea of being intentional in the way that we're speaking. Of course, we can imagine that there are different contexts in which we are speaking, and it may not be even as a leader that in every single context, we have to be paying specific attention to how we're pronouncing words. However, whenever if we're on a stage, if we're speaking in a meeting, if we're having a one-on-one conversation with a team member, it's just a good habit to get into, to pay attention to how we're pronouncing words and make sure that we are pronouncing them intelligibly and precisely. I'm also a big proponent of precise communication from the standpoint of the vocabulary we use. So there are the words that we speak, and then there's the way that we speak them. So it's a package. It's all the way they all go together. But enunciation is very actionable. And it's one of the reasons I bring it up, because we can all get better at it. We can all learn to make this a habit. I'm just going to pull out for a minute what's the difference between enunciation and articulation. We're going to deal with articulation a little later in the presentation, but basically, articulation is the how, and enunciation is the outcome we get from enacting articulation. So articulation is part of how we enunciate. That's the basic difference. And articulation is the actual physical movement of the lips, the tongue and the facial muscles, whereas enunciation is this effort to speak distinctly and clearly. And I will tell you, if you do choose to become a better enunciator and to enact this in your own life, you will stand out. It is a way of setting yourself apart from other people in a room, other people in an organization, because not that many people pay attention to it. And we can see how many people showed up today, right? This didn't attract 50 people. It attracted a few. However, it's a small thing in the end that can make a huge difference. So we can practice this just like people practice tennis. I took a formal professional speaker course 2 years ago, and we did work on enunciation. We worked on vocal warm up and all of that. So it is something that professional people are trained to do. I'm going to see if I can make this work and if you guys can hear it well enough, but you'll recognize this gentleman for sure.
Can
you hear it?
Beautifully.
Yes.
Is this something that you worked on or just from your family?
I don't even know what you mean.
I loved the Electric Company when I was a kid. And on that show, you were you're an easy reader, and and the way you spoke was, it just sounded great. I assume that you got that the way I speak is like that of a clown. So this is what I got from my family. Whereas I assume you must have I don't know.
I went to school to study how to be an actor. And in that school, Los Angeles City College, I had a voice and diction instructor who was very good at his job. And so you had to learn to speak and sound your final consonants.
So you actually learned something in college. I learned how to drink beer out of a funnel.
All right. I think he just did.
I was old.
There we go. We'll stop it there. It is funny, this video. But Morgan Freeman makes the point that he had to learn to enunciate, to finish words, to state consonants. At the end, those ending consonants, the T's and the D's. He had a thick, heavy Mississippi accent when he started acting or when he got into acting. So this wasn't something that came naturally for him. And if any of you are singers or have done acting or some type of theater, you will know that this is something that is trained into people, this way of a clear way of speaking and enunciating. So in leadership, we can think about enunciation as a currency. It is, as I mentioned, it will set you apart. It will allow your messages to land in an entirely different way. And it will elevate your way of communicating, but also what you say. It simply will level it up a whole level or more if you pay attention and actually put into practice some of the things we're going to talk about today. So the basic bottom line here is that if you mumble or trail off at the end of your sentences, use unclear diction. Diction is another one of these words, but it's in the family of enunciation. You are causing your listener cognitive friction. You're causing them to work harder to understand what you're saying. Their brain actually has to do work in order to try to pick up what you're saying, in order to try to understand what you mean, what's being emphasized here, what is important in what this person is saying. If you're not enunciating, what you're trying to say is not as clear as if you enunciate clearly. So that clear enunciation, finishing your sentences, not trailing off, not mumbling, means that your audience has an easier time of understanding you. And your message has a greater ability to stick with that listener because they have been able to clearly understand what you mean. So the smooth sailing is no potholes on the road if you are able to speak this way. The other thing is about perception. Poor enunciation and poorly enunciated speech is associated with a number of things that we don't want people to think about us. And one of them is that we lack confidence, that we're not confident, that maybe we're not as competent as we really are. And it impacts our credibility. It can indicate to people maybe that we're a bit disorganized. They might assume that we're disorganized if we're not speaking super clearly. It also can indicate a lack of conviction, that we're not super invested in what we're saying or what we're talking about, either one. So perception is everything. It's so key, and it happens in a moment. It happens very quickly. So this attention to speaking clearly is important anytime you're concerned about the impression you're making and how people are going to perceive you. That could be more important in some moments than others. However, I would argue that the higher up you go in an organization or on the org chart, the more this is important all the time. It's just a way that you need to speak. So there are some pitfalls of enunciation. There are 4 that we're going to talk about today. The first one is the mumbling and the swallowing of sounds. I'm sure you've heard this. It's things like people not, instead of saying important, they say important, important. Instead of saying want to, they say wanna. Instead of saying going to, they say gonna. I used to do the wanna, gonna, done. Wanna, gonna, dunna. Is that the other one? With my non-native English speaking students, because they would get into these habits. They would hear it and they were not enunciating because they had issues coming from their mother tongue. And so they would get into this almost slangy way of speaking. And when you're in front of a room making a presentation, that's not okay. So I would try to quash that. But as we will see, the mumbling and the swallowing of sounds is typically caused by insufficient movement of the mouth, of the jaw. Jaw tension can cause this. Can we mute him?
I did, Barbara.
Thanks. Insufficient mouth movement, tension in the jaw can actually cause this. And that is very common when people are stressed. Stress is when people almost sound like they're speaking through clenched teeth. This can be caused by their own level of anxiety. And so they do not move that jaw very much. As we'll see in a later slide, movement of the jaw is what allows all of the other articulators in your face and your mouth to actually function properly. And another reason for this mumbling and swallowing of sounds is speaking too quickly. If people speak very fast, they're not paying attention to finishing the word, putting that last consonant sound on the word. So speaking fast, I'm sure you have heard lots of people who speak very quickly, and they are harder to understand. It's also true that less of what they say sticks with their listeners. So there are several reasons for slowing down as a speaker. Pitfall number 2 is the trailing off of sentences, and it also can be upward inflection. So these two are related to each other, although not everybody does both. The trailing off is simply people not maintaining the energy all the way to the end of the sentence. They somehow, blah, 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 blah. They just kind of run out of gas before they get to the end. And this is very destructive because oftentimes the most important thing we want to say is at toward the end of a phrase. So if you're trailing out, not finishing that sentence strongly, you are robbing your audience of your most important point, or they will assume it's not that important because of the way you've said it. The upspeak is one of my triggers. I hear it when I listen to the radio. I hear it all the time, but it's my name is Barbara Boldt. My company is Boldt Global. I am a communication skills coach. Maybe, maybe not. It's very tentative. It causes you to sound uncertain. So ending the sentence on an up note isn't strictly enunciation. However, it is another habit of speech that is not, it doesn't serve. It decreases your credibility. It decreases your sounding certain or not certain. And it certainly doesn't become a leader. So that upspeak is something we definitely want to weed out of our usage, which I say that very frequently. If you've been here before, you probably heard me say that in another context. Pitfall number 3, this idea of speaking too fast. We can call it the blur effect. When you speak so fast, people are just trying to catch the words. And if you're also, because you're speaking quickly, you're not enunciating, they're having an even harder time of figuring out what it is you're saying. So we definitely, it causes us to compress those syllables, blur word endings. One word runs right into the next. So the slowing down helps us to have the time to use our equipment, as we will come to call it, in order to enunciate clearly. So definitely speaking, and again, this is something that's often caused by nerves. So people who have a strong fight or flight reaction when they have to speak in public can have a lot of issues with speaking at a good pace. Just a note, if you wonder what a good pace of speaking is, 135 words per minute is what is recommended for professional speakers in a professional speaking context. And you can figure out how fast you speak by recording yourself for a minute, turning that into a transcript, and looking at the number of words that you spoke in that amount of time. So that's a tip about how to figure out how quickly you speak. Welcome, Vibke.
Hello.
Hi. We're kind of in the middle here. So pitfall number 4 is what I would call a companion issue. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this today because I speak about this topic quite frequently, but it is this whole issue of using filler words, the like, right, you know. Filler words decrease crispness of how you speak. They fill in a silence, which could be a pause. And as we all know, pauses are golden in communication. Pauses are wonderful because they allow that listener's brain to catch up, to process, to let something land. So the filler word issue, we don't want to talk about how correctly we should pronounce those filler words. We don't want to have filler words. We want to cut them out so that we can leave some silence and some space in our sentences that allow us to pronounce words clearly. And you can tell that today I'm paying special attention to my enunciation. I don't always speak like this. However, I am demonstrating for purposes, obvious purposes, I guess we could say. So now
You sound great, Barbara.
Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate that. I definitely do pay attention to my enunciation if I'm speaking at an event or even on a Zoom call like this, because I have to walk my talk for one thing, but I also believe in it. I also believe that learning to enunciate and using that strategically is a super habit to get into. So we're going to talk now about the mechanics of speech. This is the how you can teach yourself, get into the habit of speaking clearly and powerfully, so this is kind of the meaty part here. It all starts with where your breath comes from. And I have talked about this in other contexts as well, but it's that diaphragmatic breathing. So where this woman has her hands is where her diaphragm is. It's in between your rib cage and your small intestine, basically, if we want to get really graphic. It's the spaceship-sized muscle in the middle of your body. And we want to be using it in breathing because it helps us propel our voice and speak from a deeper place. So the breathing is what powers our voice. And if we're going to speak clearly, our voice needs to have that engine. It needs to have that power to carry it forward. There's a difference between another distinction I've seen is vertical breathing, which is like when you breathe, try this in your home there. If you breathe and you primarily feel your shoulders rising, that's vertical breathing. And that means you're breathing primarily from your lungs. And obviously lungs are always involved in breathing. However, we want to be horizontal breathers, which means that the bottom of our lungs, the lower part of our lungs is actually going out like this, which makes our ribs expand. And then when we exhale, it comes back in. So out in that lower part of the belly and back in. And when we speak, if we are breathing from that level, that means that we are not going to run out of breath and our voice is not going to become thin and reedy. When we lose our voice much more quickly if we're breathing from up higher in our body. When we're breathing lower from that lower area, we are able to keep our voice strong longer as well. And I'm sure Morgan Freeman would tell us that if we asked him. He was our expert today. So we want to be breathing from low in the body. Keep that in mind. We want to be doing our diaphragmatic breathing in order to speak clearly. Another thing that really impacts our ability to speak clearly and speak well is our posture. Think about this. If we are compressed, if we're like, I'm not going to be able to show you super well on this little screen, but hunched in on ourselves, if we've got our shoulders hunched forward, if we are bent over, this happens a lot when people sit, when they are speaking from a sitting position. You need to also be tall in that chair. If you're on a Zoom call, if you're presenting virtually, you don't want, it's so habitual to be crunched in. That closes up our lungs. It decreases the access we have to our throat and all of our muscles in our body. So we definitely want to think about the resonating chambers of our body are only accessible to us if our posture is straight. And that's important both sitting and standing. We want to be straight, erect, shoulders to some degree back, head up, so that we have all of our equipment and muscles at our disposal, not like a garbage disposal. So now we're going to get to these actual articulators. There are 3 of them. I love this picture. The first articulator we're going to speak about is our lips. How often do we think about our lips? Pretty rarely, I would say. Women more than men because we put on lipstick. But we don't think about the purpose our lips serve in speaking and speaking clearly. So we're going to look at that. Our tongue. And the tongue is super important. It's probably the most important articulator that we have. And then our jaw. And we'll get to jaw here in a minute. So we're going to go through these. The role that our lips play in communication, in being able to communicate clearly, they're key in making sounds like a P, a B, an N. In all of those sounds, we are closing our lips. We're pressing them together. They also are involved in the F sound because our teeth hit our lips, and V. So the F and the V are also sounds that the lips are particularly critical for pronouncing correctly. They also are critical in helping us shape our vowel sounds. So A, E, I, all of these sounds also, it's very much facial muscles that we'll talk about in a minute. And I have an exercise that we're going to use to practice this. If we don't engage our lips, this is what leads us to mumble or swallow sounds. If you never push your lips together, you cannot make these precise sounds. So it's lazy lips is actually what they call the malady of mumbling. It's the cause of mumbling is what they call lazy lips. And if we allow that to go on, if we don't become precise with the way we use our lips, it can indicate to people that we're either kind of lazy ourselves, we have kind of low energy, we just don't want to put much effort into the way that we're speaking, or we lack conviction. So as we come back to that perception, all of these behaviors are perceived in a certain way. So that's the lips. And we are going to do some exercises in a minute that are going to help you practice this. The tongue is very important. It is involved in almost all the sounds we make in English. So we definitely want to be paying attention to what our tongue is doing or not doing. There we go. So the tip of our tongue interacts with the alveolar ridge, which is that bony ridge behind your teeth. It was too long to write that, but that's what that is. It's up here in the roof of your mouth. And it helps us to form T, D, N, and L. If you think about how close together the sounds are for T and D. Those two are hard to distinguish in the way that a lot of people speak. So if you want to test yourself, figure out how clearly you state your D's and your T's. They are important, those two letters, because they are frequently at the end of a word. So if we are mumbling them or not pronouncing those sounds clearly, it means that our words are not complete. We're not completing that word, which means it's probably running into the next word. Those sounds get dropped a lot.
Barbara, I can tell a funny story about that with the D's and T's.
Yep. Go ahead.
So my last name is Hat, H-A, and my sister ended up meeting a young man named, or his last name was Hadd, Hadd, and now they're married. And so it's funny that we're the Hats and they're the Hadds, and it's just completely random. So yeah, it's important to distinguish those for sure.
Yeah, because they're two different last names right there.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Rachel.
Yeah, so just kind of a funny thing.
That's a great example for sure.
Yeah.
So our tongue also, the whole tongue is used in pronunciation and enunciation. The sounds S and Z actually use the blade of the tongue, which is the top part. And then the back of the tongue is also involved it interacts with the soft palate in our mouth to pronounce sounds like K and ng, like running. When we pronounce running, some people might say runnin'. They're losing that ng sound in their mouth. So running, if you say that, you can feel the back of your tongue hitting the soft palate up there. So we want, if we want to be precise and clear, we want to say running. I have a running partner, not a runnin' partner. That wouldn't be as precise. So this imprecise tongue placement, either the tip or the back, or not paying attention to what our tongue is doing in our mouth, can lead to very unclear speech. This is another big problem when we're not able to understand people. And I do want to say, I'll mention right here, virtual communication magnifies the problem of lack of enunciation. I was on a call this past Sunday. We have a cousin call on my dad's side of the family. And I have a cousin who is 80 now, but he has done this his whole life. He speaks very indistinctly. He grew up in Florida. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but he also talks with his hand over his mouth a lot. And we have some other older cousins, and they can't understand him. And one of them actually said to him on Sunday, "Rick, I can't understand what you're saying." And it wasn't strictly how close he was to his microphone. It's the way that he speaks. So we really need to pay attention to the way we speak when we are on virtual calls, because it becomes more challenging because of the medium for people to understand us. Next month's topic, by the way, is virtual presentation. So I'll probably say that again next month. I'll bring it up again. Last but not least of the articulators is our jaw. And what we will learn is that the jaw is the gatekeeper of all of our way of using our face and our tongue, and our lips to pronounce. Because if we don't move that jaw, if we keep it very tight, which happens under tension for some people, you can't use your tongue effectively. You can't really use your lips effectively. So you've got to open your mouth. And that was one thing I like with that CEO that I worked with. I really emphasized with him his need to move his jaw muscles and open the mouth, because you can't possibly enunciate well if you have your mouth tied shut. So when that jaw is tight, which often happens under tension, the lips and the tongue can't move freely, and your speech is going to be muffled and compressed. And this results in a restricted, tight sound. It's the sound of someone speaking through clenched teeth. We can always tell if that's the case. And it is a dead giveaway that you're feeling stressed, that you're not comfortable, or you're nervous. So this is a reason why we want to learn to, in a lot of learning how to do this is exaggeration. When I talk to people about enunciation, I really exaggerate how I speak so they can see that my mouth is moving, that I'm moving my jaw, that I am making an effort to use all of these articulators in my face. We got somebody really late here. There we go. I don't talk like that daily. I'm not even talking like that now here. However, it gets the point across. It looks ridiculous. It sounds ridiculous. And to get better at this, you need to do some exercises in your own home, in your shower if you want to, where you're going to feel ridiculous and sound ridiculous. You do not have to do that in front of other people, but you do need to do it because that's how you develop the ability and how you trigger yourself to think about using your mouth more intentionally, using your lips, using your tongue. All of these things we're talking about here, you got to learn it and you got to practice it. All right, so we have our triangle of vocal clarity here. We've got our diaphragmatic breathing, that is the foundation. We talked about our posture and we've talked about articulation. These are the three things we need to get to vocal clarity. And vocal clarity is a big part of vocal presence. And vocal presence is a big part of executive presence or professional presence. Our voice is a huge piece of how people perceive us. So now we're going to do some practice. I don't want to run out of time for this. We're just going to warm up our jaw and our lips a little bit. So this is what we call jaw circles. We start with a wide smile and we close that down to an O shape. So it's that wide O. Try it. Wide O. This gives you a sense of what your range of motion is in this part of your body. And that will vary for different people. Some people may have a smaller range of motion in their face. And particularly like Natalia, I might expect that because you are a French speaker, although you are obviously bilingual, that I had tons of French students. I taught in Switzerland for 16 years. So I was surrounded by French speakers and they often they were able to open their mouth wider and engage their jaw. They simply didn't have to in their mother tongue. So this is something that everybody has to gain awareness about is what is that? O, E. We could maybe even make an E sound for that wide. E, O, right? So this is an exercise that you can practice. There's also the lip trill, which I personally am not able to do. I learned that 2 years ago when I took that speech class. It's where and some people are really good at it. They can just blubber all over the place. I do the that's the one that works for me, but it's the idea of activating your lips, getting your lips, feeling the hum. So just feeling your lips. We're definitely not showing this to anybody.
Like that, where you...
Yeah, you make a sound while your lips move. And in that class that I took, or that course that I took, there were some people who were so loose and so able to just. When you're
making an airplane for a little kid.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Airplane for a little kid. Sometimes if I push the edges of my mouth together, I can do it better, but I'm not going to waste too much more time on that. However, it is a great exercise because it loosens up all of the muscles in your face, around your mouth, and loosens those lips up. Now, we know that loose lips sink ships. We don't want to use that analogy. However, getting your lips loosened up is helpful. And then the next exercise, this is really fun. So we're going to do tongue twisters. And I used to do these in my classrooms all the time because they are so useful. I've got hopefully the text is big enough here that you can read it. But so this first one, Peter Piper, is about the lips. This is one where we pronounce this P sound. And I would encourage you to state it so that it pops. Peter Piper picked. So let's go through this together. You don't have to turn on your volume. You can all do this on silent and I'll just voice it for us. But do it with me at home, please. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. A peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked. If Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, where's the peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked? All right, you can see that we can really pop that P, but we can also really enunciate the other words in the phrases, like pickled, pickled. That's a great word to practice that D on the end, and pickled, the L sound. So all of the words in the phrases can help us get pronounced more clearly. This next one is really fun. It's the F. and also a lot of S and SH in this one. I love this one. It's one of my favorites. There was a fisherman named Fisher who fished for some fish in a fisher, till a fish with a grin pulled the fisherman in. Now they're fishing the fisher for Fisher. I love that one. It's hilarious. But the fisher, that's your teeth against your tongue or lip, fisher. And then you've got the fisher. For those of you who are not native English speakers like Vibke's here too now, I'm sure you just think this is hilarious because this is one of the most frustrating aspects of English is that you have these different letter combinations that sound exactly the same pretty much. And it could be very frustrating for non-native speakers. So that's the fisherman, right? There, that word fisherman, we can pronounce the M and we can pronounce the N clearly. So in all of these, as you exercise with them, and I'm happy to send you a handout of tongue twisters because I have several, make sure you are pronouncing every word very distinctly, not just the words that start with F in this one, for example, but all of the words. It's a great way to exaggerate as we speak as an exercise. This one, red leather, yellow leather, is great for vowel sounds, the A and the E. And if you say it fast, it can get really confusing, but red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather. It's also a great way to practice TH, red leather, yellow leather. Those of us who are not our native English speakers don't struggle typically with TH, although there are people that have that speech impediment. But I know like coming from French, it's very difficult to do TH. How about from German, Wiebke? Is TH not so bad?
It's a challenge. We like to pronounce it as an S.
Oh, okay.
Also in the beginning, there is no difference to hear for a native English speaker when we say think and sink.
Right.
It sounds the same because, yeah.
Well, but we know what a sink is. A sink is something.
Yeah, I think I may be right.
Right.
True. Would be my early English, my early approach to a TH.
Right, and it isn't so detectable. You're right about that. Another language group that has issues with TH are Indian speakers of English. And
Asia.
Sorry?
Asia.
Asians, yes.
In the Philippines, we have the TH, the dreaded TH. We're having issues with TH because of the geographical location, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. Joel, thanks for bringing that up. And I love the way you said dreaded TH, because it is true that some language people who have to speak English dread having to say a word that has TH in it. When I was in college, I took a physiology class with an Indian professor. And this was like 1970 something. And we called him Dr. Tick Tin because he couldn't say thick and thin muscle fibers. So we very cruelly had this nickname for the guy, Dr. Tick and Tin. But that's just to say that TH can also be very challenging for some people for whom English isn't their main language. I like this one, clean clams crammed in clean cans, because this one really does beg using your face very energetically, we could say. So that clean is that E sound to really stretch out the muscles of your cheeks. Clean clams crammed in clean cans. So this is one for overall enunciation I think is brilliant to just get your face moving and get your mouth moving. And then this one, I always preface it by saying you have to be very careful because you can say a naughty word if you screw it up. I saw Susie sitting in a shoe shine shop. Where she sits, she shines. Where she shines, she sits. And you can kind of put an SH in that last sits too. That will happen for some people. So my classes always got a big kick out of that one. But that's great and it's also great for overall enunciation practice to say these things as clearly and in an exaggerated way as you are practicing. All right. Again, nobody's going to judge you in the privacy of your own home. So that's basically what I have for us today. We've got these key takeaways, which I hope you will remember that enunciation is something we can all get better at. It is a learnable skill. And I would argue that it is, for leaders, it is particularly important. As we've seen, people make judgments about us based on how we speak. Our breath, where we're breathing from, our posture, and the use of our articulators, the lips, the tongue, the jaw, are the physical foundation for enunciation. So we have tools that many of us don't use. We just don't think to use them. Awareness and practice are key. Becoming aware that maybe you're not speaking as clearly as you could or as clearly as you'd like to, and then practicing so that you can get better. And finally, vocal clarity, we can make the argument that it is an act of respect for your audience. You're not making them work so hard if you are enunciating clearly, but it is also an act of respect for yourself because you will be perceived in a different way if you are speaking at this very elevated, clear level, if you're speaking in this way. So I'm challenging you for 7 days to commit to completing a vocal warm-up, a little tiny vocal warm-up before each time you have to speak. So if it's a meeting, if it's a Zoom call, if it's maybe you have to give a presentation, just do a little bit of that, the trill or the ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba or the o-e, so that you're just stretching out your face a little bit. I would also argue that breathing is a very good part of this exercise, just some deep breaths through so that you're doing that horizontal breathing. And that also helps calm your nerves. Breathing is so important in everything we do. Record yourself once during the week and see what you learn. How do you sound? How articulate are you in your speech? And then identify one enunciation habit that you'd like to improve and work on it. So that's all I have today. I thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure to have all of you here. I'm happy to have a discovery call with anyone, discuss this with anyone. It is one of those kind of, you could even maybe refer to it as an anal topic, but I believe that it has enough importance to spend an hour talking about it.